to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. This is episode number 448, and it is part of our Listener Before and After the Hunt series. Today's conversation is with Zach, and we catch up with Zach about how his fall elk hunt went in Montana. It was his first elk hunt. It was guided. It was something he did with his father, and you can hear all about that trip and get more context in the Before the Hunt episode, which was episode number 419. In today's conversation after the hunt, we hear about the hunt, how it went, the lessons he learned, the experiences he had, if he would do it over again in the same way, and a whole lot more. It's a great takeaway because I have not, and on the show we have not talked much about guided elk hunting, just a little bit. And so it was great to have Zach's perspective doing a guided hunt and hear how that went for him and his father and his uncle and the special trip that they had together. As always, guys, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for us, send an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com. And also, if you are enjoying the show, it would help us tremendously if you just take a second, maybe hit pause right now, and just leave a rating or review in whatever podcast app that you're using. We don't have any advertisers or do any paid promotion of the show, so your feedback, those ratings, and those reviews are what help us. So thank you for doing that. When you complete that, go ahead and come on back and let's dive into this conversation with Zach. Well, Zach, welcome back to the show. I'm really excited to hear about your hunt. I got an email from you, success photos, spoiler alert, but not a ton of the details, and you and I haven't personally talked, so I'm right along with the listeners, just excited to hear about the story and the adventure and success and lessons learned and all that good stuff. Before we dive into that, for listeners who may have not caught your Before the Hunt episode, number one, I will leave a link to that in the show description so listeners can get a bunch more context and background. But secondarily, will you go ahead and just give a real quick intro of who you are, where you're from, and then kind of the context of this hunt?
Yeah, sure. And thanks again for having me back on, Mark. It's nice talking with you again. My name's Zach. I live in South Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia. Been hunting for about 5 years now, primarily whitetail hunting. And this trip was my first trip out west. And for the trip itself, it was kind of unique because this was a kind of like a birthdays, I'll call it, hunt where this year I turned 30, my dad turned 60, and it's been, it was in the works for about 2 years of planning this, getting out to Montana to do the hunt and, doing a road trip to get out there first as well, to do some national parks and just, see the scenery out there. So it really was, I know we mentioned this on the first podcast, but it was a, trip of a lifetime, but it really was. It was just an amazing time with friends and family and having an amazing hunt.
Yeah, so cool. What parks did you all hit on the way out there?
So we basically drove from Pittsburgh to Mitchell, South Dakota, which is like 16 hours, got up the next day and drove to the Black Hills, and we did Mount Rushmore. We drove through Custer National, ended in Deadwood. Next day we went to Cody, Wyoming, but we went through like the Bighorn Mountain Range right in Wyoming there, which was amazing. Like I honestly didn't even know it was there. And I was driving through and I was like, this is the nicest mountain range I've ever been through. It was incredible. Tons and tons of elk hunters along the way there too, which was cool to see. From there, we went in through East Yellowstone down to Jackson Hole and we did Grand Tetons. We were able to actually have like a nice hiking day. So we did like Jenny Lake Trail, which I know is, really, really popular, go up to Inspiration Point, stuff like that. Then we did 2 days in Yellowstone. And then we cruised up to Bozeman on the Friday before Montana's rifle opener, which I believe was October 21st, if I remember correctly. So we got into town on the 20th to kind of get ourselves together and ready to go.
Man, that's a heck of a start to a trip, just seeing all those sights and having that time. And I guess you coming from Jersey, I guess began to have like some acclimation even, which is really cool.
Yeah, slow and steady, which was the nice part about the elevation. But I mean, it was just, I was glad for those days where we didn't have any time in the car, just because, I did the math. I think we averaged roughly, obviously, sometimes it was like that 16-hour stint was like the big one, but like we averaged like 6 to 8 hours a day in the car. And granted,
Yeah.
we're looking at incredible mountains and scenery and having fun and just, kind of just having a good time. But it was a lot, I'm not gonna lie, but it
Yeah.
was worth it. So worth it.
Yeah. And it's you, your dad, and two uncles for that entire pre-hunt portion.
Yeah, that's correct. So yeah, it was me, my dad, and then his two brothers. My dad's the middle, so his older and younger brother. And my dad's older brother is a hunter. My dad's younger brother is not a hunter, but he just, was there for the ride. Just because, again, I don't know if we're ever going to do something like this again. So
Oh, that's cool. So did he go on the hunt portion of the trip with you and just didn't have a tag, but was there for the ride on the hunt itself?
yeah, pretty much. He didn't get out as much just because and I know we'll get into it, but we were hunting from side by sides, and with just like how the setup was, it was kind of hard to get another guy in there, but he did come out every once in a while, so it was good.
Nice. So we talked before about yeah, how this hunt came together, you guys going guided. I know one of your uncles had previous experience with this specific outfit. So again, there's more context to that in the before the hunt episode. I'm just kind of curious. I guess before we get into the hunt, now, we already talked about the pre-hunt trip a little bit, but one thing I've been wanting to ask everybody with these before and after episodes. So before I get ahead of myself, between you and I chatting on the Before the Hunt podcast and your trip beginning, was there anything notable in that time? So the kind of the rest of your quote unquote preseason preparations, yeah, just anything notable from that time.
I wouldn't say anything super notable. I just spent time behind the gun. That was my big focus just because I think I mentioned in the first one, but I guess I'll just, rehash it here. I said I've been hunting for 5 years, primarily a bow hunter. Last year was actually my first rifle season, even in Pennsylvania, which is where I primarily hunt, just because I have family with land out in the Pittsburgh area. So, really, I just wanted to get trigger time, and it was just dialing in my zero, making sure you know, my, uh, my CDS that I had on my Loophole VX5 was, exactly where it needed to be, and just feeling confident to be able to take that shot. Cause I know, or I knew going into it that the chance of shooting, out there like a 300-yard shot is super common. And like, you've hunted whitetail before, Mark, like with a rifle, that's few and far between. You're
Yeah.
you're 150 in, right? At most with whitetail, 9 times out of 10. So really it was just the trigger time. I would say was the big thing.
Did you I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I am curious that custom dial system, with the loophole, which is a neat option. But one of the factors there is as you choose your ballistics, you have to somewhat account for elevation, and there's a range, of course, but what did you choose as your elevation for that CDS and those ballistics?
So that's a great question. And I agonized over this for so long, right? Because, where I live in Jersey, you can't hunt with a rifle. That's a whole nother conversation, right? We won't go down that road. But I live at 100 feet of elevation, like legitimate 100 feet, right? But where I hunt out in Pittsburgh, it's about 1,200. Right. And where I was hunting in Montana was about 6,000 to 6,500, give or take where we were at. Right. So I was trying to like split the difference. And based on conversations with Loophole and just doing internet research and everything, I landed on 4,000 feet of elevation for my CDS. With just, Montana's average for the month of October for their humidity and temperature, as well, because obviously that's information you need for the CDS. And, knock on wood, it worked perfectly. Loophole said it's plus minus 2,000 feet, right? So I figured like at 4,000, I'm kind of covered. And like, let's be honest, anything 300 and under, like 500 feet isn't of elevation is not really going to make that much of a difference, right?
Yeah.
When you get longer, obviously that's going to start to factor in, but my plan was to take nothing over a 400 to 300 yard shot, to be totally honest with you. So I felt very confident with that 4,000 foot elevation, and it frankly it kind of set me up for the future too.
Yeah, I think that's a great decision. It all makes sense. It's been a long time since I've set one of those up, but I have set those up previously, and you know, I remember one season in particular. I was getting one of those CDS styles cut, and I was looking at my hunting season, and it was like everything from Missouri to Idaho to Alaska. And I was like, oh, finding that sweet spot because I had one season in three very different contexts. So, but as you said, especially if you're keeping your shot distances pretty reasonable, those effects are going to be minimized on all those differences. What ranges were you able to shoot at home? Or I don't mean obviously literally at home, but um in your home area in Jersey or in Pennsylvania there, whatever you had access to.
Yeah, no. So I joined a gun club here in South Jersey that has ranges up to 300 yards. So I was practicing at 300, so I felt very confident there. Um, And same thing, if I had to go a little further, I knew I could do it. Just because again, I put a lot of time and effort into making sure I had a good combination between my rifle, just practicing straight, trigger time, and then at the same time making sure, I had the bullet dialed in to what the gun liked, all that kind of stuff. So just doing a lot of due diligence there. A lot of help I got from my uncle, who, I mentioned in the earlier podcast has been hunting out west for 30 plus years, and he reloads and all that kind of stuff. So I was just very fortunate to have a lot of access to information like that kind of allowed me to practice for this upcoming trip. And it, unfortunately, where I live, that's the longest range around. There's one in North Jersey that's like an hour and a half for me that I think goes out to like 1,500 yards, but I don't know. I'm not driving an hour and a half, 3 hours round trip to shoot.
Makes it tough. Cool. Let's get back to you guys arriving in Montana. And again, this is a guided hunt. So I guess part of what I want to hear about initially is, you have a trip like this, and as you said earlier, you've been planning it for a couple of years. You have an uncle who has experience doing, a trip like this with this exact outfitter. So you have some knowledge to go off of. Like that was someone who has firsthand experience, but still it's like you've never been here. You've never done this. And I'm just curious, like arriving, whether you want to talk about the outfitter or just the mountains or the whole context. Like as you're arriving and just before the hunt even kicks off, like expectations versus reality, what was your kind of initial impressions?
Yeah, I tried to go in honestly with as open of a mind as possible. And, of course, I asked a million questions to my uncle and everything. And, his answer was, well, it all depends. Right. Which I feel like is like kind of a standard answer. But, that day we got there, the guide reached out to us, and my uncle, as you mentioned, has used this outfitter numerous times before, but never these guides. And these were newer guides. They've only been guiding for 2 years, but they were phenomenal guys. They were dialed in. They knew, where the animals were at. They kind of knew the terrain like the back of their hand. You could tell that they did their homework. So, really it was just a more of going in with an open mind and, being willing to, just be game for anything, honestly. That was kind of my mentality going into this, is like, hey, I'm just here to learn. I'm here to soak this up and have a great time, right? And execute when I get the opportunity, and go from there. So when we got there on that first day, like I mentioned, he texted us, and then we asked, hey, can we zero in or confirm our zeros, right? So the nice part was we were actually able to go up into the mountains where we were hunting, after we got to the house and dropped our stuff off and got our gear together and everything. So that was kind of my first glimpse of what we would be hunting in. And we were at about, I think it was around 6,100 feet, give or take. So we went up and we just confirmed our zeros at 200. And then that was kind of it. We kind of just drove around. We actually saw a really nice bull, but they were low. That was the thing that surprised me, was how low those were. So like we were shooting at 6,100, but like they were probably closer to 5,000 maybe. I could be wrong about that, but they were really, really low. Like the basis of drainages, all that kind of stuff. And it seemed like they rutted really late too, right? That's kind of what the guide was mentioning, was like he was shocked at how low they were, and that, we were hearing bugles and seeing him chase, seeing a bull chase some what's it called, some cows. So, I was kind of surprised at that too, to be totally honest with you, because I kind of expected them to be higher based on kind of just everything I was reading and the research that I did ahead of time.
That's got to be exciting just to hear bugles.
Oh, it was the best. It was cool though, because going back real quick to just like the trip that we were doing, we stayed in right around Mammoth Hot Springs when we were in Yellowstone the day before we drove to Bozeman's that Thursday night. And my dad and I stayed at the Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel, which is like, 5 miles from Gardenier in Montana and everything. And if anybody's ever been there, there's literally elk that just like live in the middle of the little town there. And they were just ripping bugles left and right. And like I was literally going to bed that night before the hunt, just like with bugles echoing in my head. It was pretty sweet.
That's cool. I mean, it's not I've had bugling bulls on numerous mid-October hunts, but it's definitely not a guarantee, right? So I always treat it as like a bonus of being out there rifle hunting in mid-October and still have a bugling bull is always a treat.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting, man. Yeah, I guess it is interesting as well. So you guys are there for the opening week, really the opening day of rifle season. Do you know, had these guides been guiding like throughout September, and do they do archery hunts as well? I'm just I don't even know if you know, but I guess trying to get an impression of like how much direct field time they're just coming out of.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, we had two guides, right? And one of them has done archery elk the past 2 years, I think he said. So he spent, a good, 3 months, about probably 3 to 4 months out of the year for the past 2 years, just straight up elk guiding, right? Like that's what he does for his prime time job. Off season, he does some other things, but so he did do archery. The other guy, the guy that I actually was paired with, his name was Sam. He was primarily a fishing guide, and this was his second rifle elk season. So, they were, like I said, they were younger guys, newer experience, but they were still excellent. So, and we'll get to it in the story, but because of the archery experience of guiding, that's why I was able to connect on my bull. Believe it or not, because he knew a spot where it was a really good archery spot, and it just worked out that it was really good for rifle too. So that was
Nice.
pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. I meant to mention this earlier. It is so worth highlighting as a consideration because I have, very limited experience with guided hunts. I've essentially only done like the sheep and goat in Alaska, and it's a unique situation because it's a small, like the outfitter is the guide. But for listeners who are looking at guided hunts, considering guided hunts in the future, it's just I always forget to think of these, but it's like so important to remember that the outfitter may have been doing, you know, a certain hunt for 30 years and be well established and all that. But to your point, to your uncle's point, he's been coming out here for years with this outfitter. But the guide that you're actually hunting with may be newer to this area. And that's not to say anything bad about him. It's just I always forget to think through those dynamics because I hear like, oh yeah, this outfitter's been here for 20 years and yada yada yada. But you could have a guide who maybe it's his first season or it's his third season or what have you. And I just think that that's something I always overlook in considerations when I hear guys talking about guided hunts.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I agree, because like when I was asking my uncle, to your point of like, hey, what can I expect, that kind of thing? He was like, well, if we go with the same guide I went with last year, this dude's been doing it for like 8 years. And, he went on and on about that. And then we get there and it's, guys that are newer. And it's like, that's great. And like they know what they're doing, but you don't know what you'll get until you get there.
Well, unless there's something else I'm skipping, let's dive into the start of the hunt, waking up on the first day of the actual hunt day.
Yeah, no, it was one I don't know if I slept that night before, to be totally honest with you, Mark, but it was a beautiful day. It was actually really warm. Like it was like a high of like 66 day. And we legitimately like there was like no animal movement that day. So it was like kind of disheartening because like you go in so excited, right? But then like you don't see anything on the first day and you're like, man, like I didn't even like see a bull from far and everything like that. We really just spent a lot of the day driving some logging roads and getting out, glassing, things like that. And this is when, I made the realization that like how important good glass is, right? Like I know I mentioned on the previous podcast, I got a pair of those Vortex Diamondbacks, and they're perfect whitetail binos. You don't need to spend a lot of money on whitetail binos, right? But like being out there, like in the sunlight, I was fine, right? But like, you know, in the low light, early morning, late night, you couldn't see anything at least. And I was able to actually look through one of the guides. He had NL Pures, right? And oh my gosh, like my goal is just to save up and buy some because those are incredible binos. Like it was amazing. But yeah, good glass. I mean, that was like my big takeaway from that first day. Another thing that was cool, that I really enjoyed actually is we saw a little, spike, bull, and I was able to practice like a stalk on him. And that was really like my first exposure to the terrain that we were in. And like I said, this was my first elk hunt, primarily whitetail hunting. And I didn't realize how steep, right? Like some of that country is, as silly as that might sound. It gave me a new appreciation for the animal, right? And like where they live and how they survive, because like we were side hilling and, you know, it was fun. Like I really enjoyed it, but it was also, kind of hard work and everything like that. And it was just really good to practice because, you never know what scenario you're going to walk into. So I felt like that was a really good first day.
Can we hit pause on that stock? I want to hear more about it. So
Yeah.
I guess what distance was the elk when you spotted them? And even, I mean, one thing I'm curious about on this context of a guided hunt, like, you're not going to go shoot that spike. Was it your idea to be like, hey, can we stalk in? Can we close the distance? Was it the guide who said, hey, we're not going to shoot this guy, but like, do you want to try and close the distance? Like, how did that actually go down?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It was actually the guide's idea. So we were coming around a bend up on one of those old logging roads and we spotted him. I mean, you can see elk obviously from, pretty far away with your naked eye if they're in the open. So we saw him. Honestly, I don't even remember how far it was, 100, 200 yards. He really wasn't far away. But it was one of those where like we came around and like he saw or heard side by side, like turned his head and looked, and I could see we actually saw, I forgot to mention this, but there was like a cow that he was kind of pushing, right? And that cow kept going uphill. So we were like, okay, we kind of know where he's going to go, right? Like, or well, we have the high probability of where he's going to go. So the guide was like, do you want to get out and do you want to practice? We can't shoot him. He's not a legal bull, but let's get out and let's just practice. So I was like, yeah, sure. I'm game for anything. Right. So we then proceeded to just kind of like get down a little bit lower to try to drop down. So like we kind of stopped where we were, we got out and kind of dropped elevation a little bit, honestly, and kind of side hilled around, kind of like this almost like I guess the like a point, right? And then we worked our way up and basically kind of went up. And unfortunately it wouldn't have been a successful stock because he was long gone and everything like that. But just like the practice of hey, in this scenario or in any type of stalking scenario, here are the things to think about, right? Obviously you want to try to move as quickly and quietly as possible, but one thing that like I had to be better at was like keeping my head up, right? As silly as that might sound, right? Like you're on uneven terrain. You want to look where your foot is. You want to make sure you're not stepping on every stick, that's on the mountainside and making a million, different noises and all that kind of stuff. But like, you got to be, head up, actively looking. You have to have the rifle in your hand, ready to go, right? You have to be cognizant of where you're stepping in. And like, it's a lot harder than you think it is, right? Especially
Hmm.
because you're on, a steep hill that's, almost like a V, right? And you're just like, okay, that's a really good thing to know, like going into this of being someone who's never done this before and like someone who's just used to either cruising through whitetail woods and, setting up from the ground or, sitting up in a stand or something like that. Like it's just a whole new experience. And like it's spot and stalk's a lot different out there than it is, back home.
Yeah, that's great. I remember you and I discussing in the first podcast of like, yes, it's this guided hunt, but if you go into it with the intention of trying to learn as much as possible, and if you communicate that with your guide of like, taking some proactive steps to just try, whether it's very direct or not, but to try and communicate in some sense to your guide, like, hey, I'm not just here to fill a tag and kill an animal. Like, I'm here for the hunt experience. I want to learn. I want to soak in as much of this as possible and not just like show up, be a client, fill a tag, go home. I remember us discussing that. Did you, up until this point or before this point, had you communicated anything like that, whether directly or subtly, to your guide? Because again, I don't have experience on a ton of guided hunts, but it does strike me as I would assume it would be more unique than more commonplace that this guide
Hmm.
would have offered you that opportunity to do a stalk on an animal that he knows is not going to be a legal shot opportunity. So I'm curious
Yeah,
if that
no,
was in any way like him offering that because he knew what you wanted, or if that was just that was what he did.
no, that's a great point. In my opinion, it was more of he was being cognizant of what I communicated to him. So kind of like before the night before that Friday before opening day, we were kind of just, chatting and everything like that and asking the guide a few questions just about what to expect and kind of like what their kind of like game plan was, right? Just so like we weren't just going in blind. But I kind of told him, I'm like, hey, Sam, I'm good with like 400 and in. Like, I feel super confident at that, right? Um, my plan is to kind of honestly, I don't really care what my first bull looks like as long as it's legal, right? Like, I'm here for the experience. And like, I was like, assume that I know nothing. And like, as long as I'm not getting in your way, I want to learn, right? And like, I'm not going to ask you a million questions, but like, I'm just going to kind of sit back and observe, and I'm going to be active, and whatever you say, I'll do, right? Like, just, I'm here to kind of just soak this all in. And I probably didn't say that verbatim, but like that was what I was really trying to communicate to him ahead of time. And to his credit, I think he truly listened, right? Because, as we'll discuss further, I really did get that, which was like a really, really cool thing in my opinion. So being able to do that practice stalk and, being able to, have a guide that was willing and open to like sharing information with me was like, it was a really nice experience.
That's great, man. Yeah, it would not surprise me if he only gave you that opportunity because of what you just said and what you had communicated to him. Um, yeah, so that's cool. I'm glad that that was communicated, and then probably it sounds like in multiple ways you got more out of this hunt because you went into it with like that humility and the willingness to like express like I'm here to learn. I don't want to be in your way, but like assume I know nothing. That's honestly a great thing for a hunt like this.
I probably said that like 4 or 5 times the entire trip, to be totally honest with you. Like between the stalking and between just like going into it, and then like when we got to the point, not to jump ahead, but like when we were quartering the animal out, right? Like, I wanted to do all the work, and I, could have sat back and been like, yeah, no, we're paying guides to do this, but like, no, that's not really what I wanted out of this. And to your point, just being able to communicate that really made a difference.
I mean, again, feel free to go into any other part of day one, but you kind of mentioned in general it was slower going. Any other events, takeaways from that first day?
No, and I'll recap, kind of like my big takeaways, but I kind of mentioned the importance of good optics, and then just the importance of good boots too. I just can't underscore that enough. Like trust me, I did fine. Like I had the pair of those insulated Danner pronghorns, and like they held up and they did their job, but like invest in good footwear. That's all I got to say, right? It's simple as that. Again, as silly as that might sound, and there might be people listening that are like, well, yeah, no duh, but like, I just can't, like, from firsthand experience, buy a good pair of boots. It'll invest and pay dividends down the road. I thankfully had no issues, but I just noticed, even side hilling, like, I could feel my ankle and feet bending. And, thankfully I trained, and I try to be in as good a shape as I possibly can be. So I was fine with that unstable ground and walking and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, good boots. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah,
um, and then if you're cool with it, Mark, I'll move on to day two
for
here.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so day two, Sunday, was just another really nice day. It was almost identical in terms of weather to day one. Like I'm talking like I was in a hood, like a little quarter zip, like mid-layer hoodie. That's it. And like I was super comfortable even early in the morning. And it was actually interesting. It was actually just the guide and and I guess I maybe should have backed up, but with the two guides, there was four total hunters. It was my uncle, my dad, myself, and my cousin who flew in from Pittsburgh. And so we had two hunters to one guide, right? Well, that morning, for whatever reason, my dad just wasn't feeling super great. So it was just the guide and I that morning. And because of that, we were actually able to, get out of the side by side and actually hike, right? And like get into some territory and terrain that allowed us to kind of have more of an element of surprise on our side. And I truly believe that made all the difference, right? So basically, we got out, first light and everything like that. We're at the trailhead. I guess I can't even call it a trailhead. It was basically like a blocked off, logging road that we had access to, right? So we hike up into there, and it's not far. We maybe go a mile, if that. We set up on a glassing spot, and like we're on top of the logging road above this drainage where like it is so tight. Like you can't even really see that well down into it because of how tight it is. It's like this super, super sharp V, right? Just drops straight down and up. You can still get down into it, right? But you really can only glass from one spot. Well, we glass, we don't see anything. And the guide's like, you know what, hey Zach, let's move further back just to check it out. And keep in mind for context, right? This is the spot that the main guide guided in archery, right? So it's very, very tight timber, really, really deep and narrow drainage, kind of perfect archery elk hunting, right? So we go to the second glassing spot and we can't see anything. It's so tight and dense. And we're like, okay, let's just try one more, get towards the back of the drainage, find the third spot, and just like, let's just look, right? Let's just see if we can see anything. So maybe we can get a nice like bird's eye view down the drainage because of where we're going to set up. Who knows, right? That kind of thing. We can't see anything in the third spot. So we look at each other and we're like, well, what the heck are we going to do? Right? Like we can't see anything. Like, do we just go back to the first spot? Like, do we just like call it and like maybe try another area? I don't know. And to the guide's credit, he goes, honestly, he's like, our best shot is going to be that first glassing spot. Right. So we get back, and I'm not kidding, within probably 10 minutes of us getting back and kind of settling down into glass, I kind of like looked over to my left and I just see this ginormous golden blob, and with like my naked eye. And I like nudge Sam and I'm like, Sam, that's an elk. That's an elk. I was getting all excited and stuff like that. And Sam quickly glasses over, looks down, and he's like, oh crap, yes, it is. He's like, and that's a nice bull. And he's like, that's a shooter. He's like, okay, let me get my rangefinder out. He gets it out, and he ranged him at 261 across to the other side of the drainage. And thankfully, it was in like the one open spot that we could see down in. And it was like everything aligned for this to happen. So we ended up switching positions, right? And I had a bipod on the front of my rifle. So I was able to get prone with the bipod on the short legs. And I think mine extends up to 10 inches. So I was on like the shortest setting, which was like maybe I think 5 inches or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But basically, I was able to get prone, and I literally just clicked my CDS to the 2.6, right at 260. And I just set up and I just like kind of found him in the scope, and I just took like a nice big deep breath and pulled the trigger. And first shot, smoked him, right, dropped him on the spot, I think just from the nervous system shock. And I started pulling my head out of the scope because I saw him go down, right? I was like, wow, that was easy. Like one shot, one kill. There we go. Awesome. Like I did my job, and, I got exactly what I was looking for out of this. And then next thing you know, the guy's yelling at me, get back in the scope, get back in the scope. So I'm like, oh crap, rack one real quick, reacquire him. And he somehow got to his feet, right? And he started walking. And, the guy told me ahead of time, his policy was basically just keep shooting until he's down. He's like, we want this to be as painless of a death as possible for this animal. He's like, we want to do this as ethically as possible. He's like, just keep going. They're really, really tough animals. He's like, just keep going. Right. So second shot, literally hit like I right in the crease. Like it couldn't have been a better shot. And I just could see, him gushing. And I rack another one, keep following him, and he's kind of like stepping between trees. And the guide goes, if he steps out from behind that tree, he's like, shoot him a third time. I'm like, okay, no problem. I was ready to go. And I'm frankly amazed that the gun didn't go off because I was applying pretty good pressure to that trigger for that third shot. He literally took two steps beyond the tree and just tumbled down. And like we were just hooting and hollering at the top of the logging road, and like it
Yeah.
was such a cool experience, and like we were hugging and high-fiving it, like we were just so hyped, so unbelievably hyped. And it was and then you have the sobering thought of like, oh crap, we got to get him now out of this really really steep drainage. But it was a really cool experience.
That's amazing, man. It sounds like you were able to stay calm, when you spotted him and got set up for the shot and got him in the scope. Uh, that's impressive,
Yeah, no, thanks.
first elk and everything.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. That was the one thing that when I reflected on this, I was honestly like really pleasantly surprised by myself with is like, look, I've gotten buck fever before, right? When I've been sitting in a tree stand and I've been full draw and I'm shaking like crazy to the point where like I can't even pull the bow, like I can't, I'm gonna miss, right? I had zero of that, right, with this. And I don't know, I was trying to like reconcile why, right? Because again, it was my first elk, right? And granted, it did happen fast. So maybe I didn't have time to register what we were doing beyond like, hey, we need to do these actions, right? But I personally think it was more because it was a rifle hunt, right? And like you're kind of disconnected from the animal, in my opinion, right? You're not up close and personal. You're not within, 40 yards of an animal where you can, literally smell them. Um, I don't know, maybe that's just me and how my brain works, but like I just felt super detached and disconnected in a good way, right? Like it wasn't like I didn't feel any empathy or emotion. Obviously I was elated and kind of sad that the animal died and all that kind of stuff, but like at the end of the day, like I just think it was being able to like have that muscle memory and practice and trigger time to be able to like take a deep breath, zone in and just like deliver a good shot, right? um yeah, and I think that's kind of like it felt like everything that I did for the past 2 years came to fruition, right? All the work
Hmm.
of shooting, all the work of like working out early in the morning, you know lugging around a 80 to 100 pound sandbag to all those different things of like investing money in good gear and planning this trip. It felt like this culmination of everything came together, and like it just felt really good to execute in a time like that. It was just a very reassuring thing for both like my hunting life and then like my personal and professional life, if that makes any sense.
It makes a ton of sense. Yeah. I mean, it's all uh, one, that's part of like whether you have success or not, that's what part of what makes a trip like this so great is not just the trip, but everything that goes into it. It's something to look forward to. It's something to prepare for. It's something to work towards. And you're essentially making yourself better as you quote unquote prepare for this hunt with training and stuff like that. Like, yeah, there's so much to it, but especially when the success happens and you have put in a lot of work and all that, it's even just more fulfilling and more rewarding. And I don't know how you feel about this, Zach, but as minor as this may seem, uh, and I'm not saying this to take like to say anything about this being guided or non-guided or like, all that, but I would just say for me personally, if this were my hunt, I would feel particularly uh I would be I don't know, proud's not even the right word. I would if I were you, I would have been glad that I slash you in this case had spotted that elk and not the guide. Again, not to take
Right.
away anything from if you would have spotted it and you shot it, whatever, but it is cool to be like, okay, yeah, I'm on this guided hunt, but still, I saw this bull, it's just,
Right.
it may seem minor, but if it were me, I'd just, that would be cool.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that, Mark. I was kind of reflecting on that too, and I was like, I was laughing because that first day, I mean, we spent hours and hours behind the glass, as and a lot of the listeners know with elk being elk hunters. But like, I just kind of laughed to myself that like the first shot opportunity we had was 261 yards away, and we could see him with the naked eye.
Yeah.
Right, like I was just laughing. I'm like, we put all that out, like that, literally an 8-hour day of glassing the day before, and not even an hour after first light we see it with our naked eye. It made me laugh a little bit. So yeah, it was cool.
I'm assuming recovery begins, as you said, you saw him go down. So there's not, you're not having a blood trail and all that stuff, which is always great. I am somewhat curious too. I don't know if this is skipping ahead, but because it is a guided hunt, did you guys like quote unquote call in reinforcements right away, or was it just you two breaking him down and starting to pack him out?
Yeah, no. So because like I wasn't with the main guide, he kind of just let the main guide know, like, hey, we got a bull down, right? But before he even did that, right, we kind of looked at each other and he goes, okay. So he's like, this drainage sucks. And I'm like, sweet, okay, this is what I was signed up for, right? And he's like, we can do one of two things. He's like, we can either go all the way around on the logging road to where he was at, drop down and then go straight back up and then do the long way. Or he's like, or we can go the really, really, really steep way and just go bomb down and bomb straight back up. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, I remember saying this like verbatim. I was like, Sam, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So like, let's just send it, right? Like, I don't want to be lugging this thing around all day because like again, I told him like I want to help pack out. Like I want to learn how to do the gutless method because I've never done that before. Um, so he was like, okay, let's send it. So we ended up just bombing straight down the drainage, and I guess I should back up before we did that. Like right after I shot the animal, I dropped a pin from where I shot him on Onyx. And then I used, and I don't know if you've used this, Mark, but like their compass slash rangefinder mode was
Hmm.
like the most incredible thing in the world. I literally put it right at 261. I dropped a pin of where he was standing, right? And when we went down that drainage side and basically walked to where he was, and I knew he went down from when we shot him because he went towards the water, right? Um, like we basically walked to exactly where he was standing, and then we looked straight down, and I'm like, oh, there he is. And it made finding him like stupid easy. Like he traveled a total of 25 yards from where I shot him to where he died. So like it was just cool to kind of have that in my Onyx to like look back on, right? And like I started a track and everything too. So like I kind of know all the stats of like how far we went down and elevation gain and all that kind of stuff. Um, so basically, we got to him, right? And from there, he was like kind of on this really steep embankment on like the side of the drainage. And we took a few photos, and I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, man, this is gonna suck having to cut this like big animal up on the side of like this steep drainage. And the guy looks at me, he's like, hey, what are your thoughts on just dragging him to the bottom? He's like, I know it's gonna be more, elevation gain for us, but he's like, it's just gonna be easier to process him that way. And I was like, yeah, let's let gravity do its work. And we just started tugging on him, and we kind of like gently guided him down to the base of the drainage to some nice flat ground next to a nice creek running through. And that's where we got to work. And during that time, we didn't have really any cell phone service. We had like maybe one little baby bar. So we couldn't send any Onyx pins. But basically, what we did was the main guide knew where we were because he kind of gave us that spot right from the archery season. But then on top of that, we took off our blaze orange and we hung it high in trees on the side of the hill, right? So he could easily see down and see where we're at. So we got to processing and we got about half the animal done, right? We got a hind quarter and the front quarter off. We got the head off, and we were about to flip them when the main guide got down there. So between the three of us, we made really, really short work of it. And I have to say, I used a Havlon and I used one of those Argalia Sirach knives, and like both of those are incredible. My personal, just because I get skeeved out of how sharp those Havlons are, right? That Argali knife is amazing. So kudos to those guys because they make a good product. But we quartered them up and threw them into some game bags, and next thing you know, we're loading packs. And I still have my 4800 K3 that I was using to train with and all that kind of stuff. It's what I carried on the hunt and everything. And I loaded that up with a hind quarter, the head, and obviously the antlers and all that kind of stuff, plus my rifle. And um, I just, I have to say, I was just amazed at how well that weight distributed on that pack. Like, it was heavy. Don't get me wrong. Like, it probably was close to 100 pounds, just because based on my training, I've used 80-pound bags before, and like, it felt heavier than that just from the pure pressure on my shoulders and, hips, but it really was not that bad. It was like the total distance I think we went was only like a mile and a quarter or something like that, but we had like 500 feet of elevation gain in like half a mile. So it was basically like straight up and down. And like we were just like crawling on hands and knees on the way up. So that was a cool experience. Took some rest along the way, and I felt great though. That was the good thing. It was like I was riding high on that adrenaline of like, endorphins of like, shooting a good bull. But then at the same time, like physically, I felt great because I put all that time and effort for the past 2 years into being able to do that pack out, right, with zero issues. And we just got back to the logging road, took him down, and we were able to get him to the processor, and thankfully the processor was able to turn it really, really quickly. Literally in 2 days, I had my elk back to me because we were driving back a few days later. And that was one thing I think might be important to highlight here is we did our homework ahead of time. So like we called out to different butchers in the area and kind of like, introduced ourselves and kind of familiarized ourselves and explained our situation of like, hey, on Thursday, what would that have been, the 26th, we're driving back to Pittsburgh across the country. Like, can you process meat? Like, how fast can you process? Like, I know you're going to be busy and we're not asking you for any favors, but like, if we get a bull this date, like how fast do you think you can turn it? And we thankfully found a guy who literally turned it in 2 days. So I dropped it off Sunday and I got it back on Wednesday morning, which I was pretty impressed with.
Yeah.
And then I was able to I'm gonna do a Euro. So I dropped it off at a taxidermist out there that they ship all over the country. So I'll just have it shipped back to me. And that was kind of the second day. It was a pretty good day, if I say so
I would
myself.
say so. Yeah. I would say it's a very good day. Yeah. And obviously you sent me a couple pictures. He's a gorgeous bull, like nice, dark, and yeah, just neat, man. Congrats.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Do you know where the Euro is going? Do you have a good spot for it?
So I got home and my wife was like, I think it would look really good in the dining room. And I'm like, yes. So we have like this nice big open wall that has like this armoire below it, right? Or whatever you want to call those big things that go in dining rooms. And it's kind of a nice big blank space wall. I'm just afraid it might come out a little too much. So it might go there. If it doesn't, I have a detached 2-car garage that I've converted into a home gym with like, the full squat rack and all that kind of stuff. So if not, it's just going up on the wall in there. So either
Yeah.
way, it's going to be in sight.
Nice, man. I like it. At what point did you get back able to connect with your dad and your uncles and kind of share the success and the story? I'm just kind of, it's a special moment, right? Like,
Yeah.
how did that all go down?
Yeah, no, it was awesome. So literally like as soon as I shot him, like the first thing I did was I dropped the pin just and then did the compass mode thing or rangefinder mode thing. And then I texted my wife, my dad, my family group chat, and then my best friend Steve, and all in that order. And then my uncle and Brian in a group chat, my cousin Brian, who were out hunting with the main guide. And that was basically the order that I texted everybody. And all I texted was bull down in all caps. And it was cool because like I got back and like I had like over 100 text messages of like just people like, oh my gosh, like because my dad, started telling everybody and blah blah blah. He didn't even have pictures yet. I was kind of cracking up at that, but it was so cool and so special. And like I couldn't wait to get back to the house to like, get back just to share the recap with everybody and show them that the antlers and the meat and all that kind of stuff. And um I couldn't like wipe a smile off my face, to be honest with you. We were going back, we cranked up some Metallica and blasted some some Metallica, some good elk kill music on the way back to the house. So that was a fun drive back. And then um we got back and like I just gave my dad a big hug and like, my uncles came up to me, hugged me, my cousin came up, gave me a big hug. So it was really cool. It was a very, very special moment and like something that I'll remember forever, forever.
That's neat, man. This is skipping back, but you mentioned hanging your European mount and how far it may stick out. There's obviously, I feel like countless ways to hang a European mount these days in different brackets and all that stuff. One in particular that I've used, and I'm saying this partially in particular, because you talked about it sticking out. I had a similar situation where I didn't want to. I've used like skull hookers and stuff like that in the
Mm-hmm.
past where they're held a little bit more at an angle, but they do come out from the wall. Um, I hung. We moved this summer, and I had a particular spot I wanted to hang a bull, and I wanted it to not stick out as much. And Montana Ridge Outdoors makes a super simple European hanger, and it basically instead of hanging it at an angle that's coming out of the wall, like where the front of the face is out away from the wall, it hangs
Mm-hmm.
it vertical. So like basically the skull and the teeth hang in line and like almost rest against the wall, and it kind of keeps everything more compact. But it's actually a super cool look. I really like it.
Oh,
Um,
is it the vertical European hanger? I just
yeah,
Googled it quick.
yep. And it's only
Okay.
$20. It's super simple. It's just like a hook and then this cable that you insert into the back of the skull. It's the easiest like hanging of an animal I've ever done in my life, and I really like it. So it's not a that guy. I don't know him from Adam. This isn't a plug, but I'm super happy with that one. And if you want particularly something that's more space saving, I would check that one out.
I know I appreciate that. I'll save it in one of my tabs.
Yeah, it's super slick, really easy, and yeah, I love it. All right, that was an aside. I was looking that up while we were hearing about the rest of your story. So the rest of the hunts, you had other guys there, other tags. Was there any other stories or success, or was your elk
Unfortunately, no. I was the only one who tagged out. You know, I I felt bad for especially for my uncle and my cousin Brian because they combined, I think they did in 5 days like over 300 miles on the side by side. Just like driving these logging roads and trying to find, animals and you know, I went out with them for a few days after just to kind of like be there as another set of eyes and if they did get something to help pack out and all that kind of stuff. But um we just had such interesting weather, right? Where the first 2 days were like 60, 70 degrees. Then Monday dropped down to like 50s. And then Tuesday, Wednesday was legitimately 25 and snowing or colder. Like, so we ran the gambit of weather, right? And it just seemed like going back to my earlier comments about like the elk being really low and kind of like late to rut, it just felt like there weren't a lot of like the animals were there, don't get me wrong, right? But it just didn't feel like they were super active. I was very fortunate that I was able to, kind of be able to hike out, right? And like kind of get away with the side by side and all that kind of stuff. The reason why, my uncle was in the side by side is because he's permanently disabled, so he's limited with his physical ability to walk up and down those mountains and stuff like that. So, I just kind of felt bad that those guys weren't able to kind of connect on something, but it was still a good trip, all things considered. Just because I think they were more excited that I shot one being like a newer hunter and kind of like the only boy on that side of the family, right? Versus if they shot one themselves. So that was kind of cool. But at the end of the day, there was no other success, but it was still just an amazing trip.
the we've talked about this in numerous podcasts with different stories and tips and strategies, but for you personally, what was the strategy for getting that meat back? So you got it from the processor, but you have this long road trip. Did you just have standard coolers? Did you use dry ice, typical wet ice? Anything in particular on that?
Yeah, no, we literally just had two big like basic igloo coolers, right? Nothing fancy, like just ones you can buy for what, like $100 from like Walmart or anywhere like that. We literally just loaded it up in the base. We threw cardboard over the top, and then I bought about, based on what the ice guys were telling me, I bought about 70 pounds of dry ice, and I just layered that on top, half and half, into both the coolers. And by the time I got it back, the meat, because I flew home just because, I had to get home to my wife and at the time 10-week old. Um, let's see, that was Thursday. I flew home, got in at midnight. I picked the meat up from my parents' house north of Philadelphia on Saturday around 3 p.m. It was rock solid, like zero issues. And, for half the trip, it was 70 plus degree weather. So legitimately, I think that meat would have stayed good for another probably close to a week because there was still dry ice in those coolers. It was pretty amazing. So highly recommend just filling the coolers kind of almost to the top, leaving enough room for dry ice and cardboard. Don't put the dry ice obviously on your meat because you're going to, dry freeze it. And then, just let it do its thing. We opened up the little vents in the bottom of the coolers just so there's no like pressure buildup or anything from the, dry ice expanding, but worked like a charm.
Perfect. I like it. Have you had any meals yet?
Not yet, not yet. I will. It's just been a little bit of a whirlwind getting back into dad life.
Yeah, I
Uh,
bet, man.
it's been I'm just so unbelievably happy to be back with them, but it definitely took me a day or two to kind of adjust. Like I underestimated, and I know we were talking before this we started recording, but I underestimated like how much like a newborn can change in 2 weeks. And just like being on a different schedule and different things. So it took me a day or two to kind of get back into the swing of things, but it's all good now. So I will be making it soon. It's been a bit of a whirlwind. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I'm not sure when this podcast is airing publicly or people are hearing this, but we're recording it just a few days after you getting home. So yeah, I'm
Yes.
sure it's been busy.
Yes, it has been. And the nice thing is I took the week off after from work. So like I kind of have this week to reacclimate to life. And that's not elk hunting life. And
Yeah.
then I can, be back in the swing of things. So it's all good now.
I don't even know how I would answer this question like off the cuff. So if you don't have a great answer, haven't had time to reflect on this, like don't feel pressured to say something. But is there anything that stands out from this hunting experience that you think is going to apply to change, inform, or improve whitetail hunting for you back east?
110%. So it's funny. I was actually reflecting on that because coincidentally, I was literally out this morning. Like I got back 30 minutes before we jumped on this. But the one thing just purely from a like spot and stalk kind of like hunting whitetail from the ground, at least on public land near where I live, because that's frankly the easiest for me to get out with, especially with a newborn, is just like the importance of using terrain features, right? Like, again, I know that might sound like rudimentary to like people that have elk hunted before and everything, but just like when you're stalking, like staying below, like, at least a ridge line out west, but like, if you're moving through the woods for whitetail, it's like, trying to use natural cover as best as possible, right? When you're reading sign, looking for tracks, looking for scat, that kind of stuff, like just don't be afraid to kind of like be more I don't want to say more aggressive, that's not the right word, but like I guess maybe take calculated risks, maybe
Mm,
that's the best way to say it, if that makes sense, right?
hmm.
Where it's like use very educated guesswork or use information that you have on hand to make an educated guess on where the animal will be or was, and then adapt from there. So I think it just gave me a lot more confidence to be more of a mobile whitetail hunter. And then I haven't connected on one yet this year for whitetail, but if I am fortunate enough to do so, doing the gutless method, like, oh my gosh, where was this my entire life? Like, like, I still remember gutting my first deer and being like, what am I doing? This is like
Yeah.
horrible. And like, why isn't the gutless method more popular? Like that's going to be my other big takeaway is like always throw those Hargali game bags in my back, right? And like if I kill a whitetail, like just cut that thing up and take it right to a processor, right? Simple as that. It's just nothing crazy. So I would say those are my two things.
Yeah, great stuff, man. I'm excited for you. Such a fulfilling thing. Cool that you got to, yeah, just everything between getting an elk, yes, but learning lessons, gaining experience, sharing it with family, adding extra adventure to the road trip and national parks. Like, just, I mean, you said it before, like a once in a lifetime trip. Yeah, I think so. That's awesome.
I appreciate it, and thanks for allowing me to share this. It was a really cool opportunity, so I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap. Congrats again to Zach, and thank you for sharing the story with us. Listeners, if you, maybe as you're planning your year this year, have a special hunt, unique hunt, or something you think may be a good fit, I plan to do more listener before and after the hunt episodes here in 2024. So as you put your hunt plans together, if you have something that you think would be a good fit for the show, reach out and let us know. Whether you want to reach out about that or you just have other questions for the show, as always, you can send an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com. Finally, if you haven't yet, be sure to hit subscribe or follow in your podcast app so that you receive future episodes automatically, and we'll talk to you soon.